My name is Nancy Hand, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. Thank you for joining us today for our second voter education program of the season on the 10 ballot initiatives voters will decide in November. We respectfully acknowledge that the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the Tohono O'odham and the Pascua Yaqui people. We also humbly acknowledge that for most of its history, our organization has not been welcoming to women of color. To quote our CEO of the League of Women Voters of the U.S., Virginia Case Solomon, even during the civil rights movement, the League was not as present as we should have been. While activists risked life and limb to register Black voters in the South, the League's work and our leaders were late in joining to help protect all voters at the polls. It wasn't until 1966 that we reached our first position to combat discrimination. Still, our focus on social policy was from afar, not on the front lines, and African Americans were shut out of the vision of the League. Today, we invite all people, regardless of gender, gender identity, ability, ethnicity, or race, to join us as we commit to righting the wrongs of our past and building a stronger, more inclusive democracy. The League of Women Voters is an all-volunteer, nonpartisan organization. We do not support or oppose political parties or candidates at any level of government. Our mission is to empower voters and encourage active, informed participation in government. We envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate, and where every eligible citizen is registered, informed on all candidates and issues, and votes. Toward that end, since 1920, the League has provided education and advocacy on issues of the day. And now I would like to hand it over to our moderator for today, League member Sherry Springer.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome everyone who's joined us today. As Nancy said, my name is Sherry Springer, and I will be your moderator this morning. I'm assisted behind the scenes by Ann Davis, who will sort questions, Rebecca Cook as timer, and Jeremy Brittle, our Zoom tech guru. Additional thanks to Sue Diarmond, Barbara Norander, and Judy Wood for coordinating this event. As Nancy mentioned, this November's ballot will have 10 statewide ballot propositions. To help people become better aware of the content and implications of these propositions, the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson has a tradition of hosting an information session for League and community members. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping points. For continuity, the question and answer segment will follow our final panelist. During each presentation, those of you participating by Zoom can write your questions into the Q&A section typically located at the bottom of your screen. If your question is intended for a specific proposition or speaker, please do indicate that. After all presentations are concluded, I'll ask the questions that have been submitted. For those watching on Facebook, unfortunately, the Facebook platform doesn't provide an interactive option to ask questions. But from previous experiences, we've learned it's likely someone else will ask that question for you. To explain the 2022 ballot propositions, we have 3 League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson members who are part of our Speakers Bureau. The Speakers Bureau gives presentations to organizations in Tucson and Southern Arizona on various national and state issues, as well as general civics. Our first speaker will be Cindy Sofran, who will explain the mechanics of ballot propositions. Cindy joined the League of Women Voters soon after moving to Arizona. The Speakers Bureau intrigued her as an opportunity to share what she learned about the various topics the group researched. She also participated in the League's Legislative Day held at the state legislature in Phoenix. Cindy is a retired auditor and enjoys gardening, reading, exercising, yoga, and tap dancing. Welcome, Cindy. Our second presenter will be Vivian Hart, who will discuss the proposed state constitutional amendments. Vivian is a former president of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson and is the chair of the League Speakers Bureau. She currently teaches online classes on assertiveness, self-confidence, and teamwork to students worldwide, and coaches people on confidence and assertiveness. Vivian is the co-author of Self-Esteem for Dummies in the Dummies series. Welcome, Vivian. The final speaker will be Shirley Mooney. Shirley has been a member of the League of Women Voters since the 1960s and a member in Arizona since moving here 20 years ago. As a League member, she has worked on candidate forums, voter registration, and the Speakers Bureau. Shirley is on the boards of the Tucson branch of AAUW, the Tucson Great Decisions Association, and she volunteers with the Friends of the Pima County Library. Welcome, Shirley. I'll now turn it over to Cindy Sofran, who will tell us about the different types of ballot propositions.
Thank you very much, Sheree. I'm going to discuss the initiative and referendum process in Arizona. It's different in every state, and so I think it's worthwhile for people who live in Arizona to know how their government works. An initiative is something that's new, and it can be a constitutional amendment or a state law, but it has to be put forth on the ballot as an initiative, and it can be done by the voters or by the legislature. A referendum is something that changes something old or something that has been recently passed. So if the legislature passes a law in the immediately passed session, then the voters can get together and veto it. But they have to do it by petition, and we'll discuss that later. The referendum can also be made by the legislature if they want to change something that was referred in the past. So either voters or legislatures can put either of these on the ballot. Voters, however, must circulate a petition in order to get something on the ballot. Ballot propositions are numbered in a specific way, so you can always know what you're voting for. If it's 100 series, you know it's a constitutional amendment. If the proposition has a 200 number, then it's a citizen initiative or referendum. And if it's a 300 number, it's been put forth by the legislature, and 400 series are always local ballot issues. Now, there are special rules, and there's just a few of them that are put up here for presenting presenting an initiative on a petition. And it is, these are just a few of them that I can fit on the screen, but there are a lot of them, such as how the petition has to be formatted for the Secretary of State to look at, how the signatures must be made, how many signatures are required. There's many rules that regard petitions. The initial steps to a petition for a voter, for the citizenry, is that the first thing they do is get a number, and then they file it with the Secretary of State. Now, if they get a number and they want the Arizona Legislative Council to review it, which is a wise move, they do that before they file it with the Secretary of State. So the Arizona Legislative Council will review the petition as it is to make sure that the verbiage is legal and constitutional, and they'll let you know if it makes sense or not. It's a good step to take, and you'll find out later when you hear about the initiatives that this is a very important step to make. Now, there are many statutory requirements for what the petitions must say and how it must be said, such as there has to be a summary, has to be no more than 100 words. The title of the initiative has to be descriptive, so that the voters know from the title exactly what they're voting for. After that, it goes to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee fiscal review, where we find out how much that initiative would really cost the voters and the state as far as taxes is concerned. Now, there are signature requirements for every petition. If it's an initiative that the citizenry is putting on the ballot, it must be 10% of the number of voters that voted in the immediately preceding gubernatorial election. In our case, the immediately preceding was 2018 when Governor Ducey was elected, and there were about 2.4 million votes in that election. So if you're putting out an initiative from the citizenry, then you have to have 10% valid signatures to put that petition as on the ballot as a proposal. If it's a referendum, the petitions require 5%, and that's just because it's an old issue. So you only are required to have 5% of the 2.4 million voters that voted in the immediately preceding governor election. If it's a constitutional petition, it is required to have 15%. And there are none on the 2022 ballot, but it's a higher bar to jump over if you want to amend the Constitution in Arizona. Now, in 38 days after you put in your petition, there has to be a verification of the signatures on the petition. It must be in the proper format. As you know, if you've signed any petition, you can tell that if you have a Y or a G in your name, you're in trouble because you can't go below the line that you are signing. The Secretary of State removes all those petitions that are not in the proper form, that don't have the attachments that are necessary, that don't have a signature page attached, that people haven't signed it proper. No, the signatures on the petition are checked by the county recorder office. The Secretary of State presents 5%, randomly presents 5% of the petitions they received that year, and they send it to the county recorder offices to have the signatures verified by the county recorder. The county recorder has 15 days to do this. After that, it goes back to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State has 72 business hours to project the number of valid signatures. So it's all done by statistics, basically. You take a sample of the petitions, and then you project how many of the valid petition signatures are available, so to speak. And if you don't reach that bar, if your valid signatures don't reach that bar, your petition cannot get on the ballot, unfortunately. So that is the way it is determined. And that is the basic of initiative and referendum in Arizona.
Hi, I am Vivian Hart, and I am going to talk to you about the first 5 ballot propositions. All right, so these first 5 are all constitutional amendments that the legislature put on the ballot. Now, just to let you know, the legislature, in order to put something on the ballot, has to do a very, very simple thing: raise their hand. If a majority of them in both of the chambers say they want this on the ballot, it gets on the ballot. Now, this year, with the 2 that Shirley Muni is going to be talking about that are citizen ones, they had to get over 240,000 signatures in order, valid signatures, to get on the ballot. And generally, they'll try to get twice as many to make sure they have enough valid signatures. But with these first 5, these are all put on by the legislature, and they are constitutional amendments. The first one is changes the existing Voter Protection Act, Proposition 128. What it does is it changes the current law, and it allows the Arizona legislature to amend or repeal any ballot measure that's been passed by the citizens. If it has any illegal or unconstitutional language in it that's found by any Supreme Court, then the Arizona legislature can amend it to anything they want or repeal it entirely. This can be done if it's just a simple sentence or a part of a sentence or one word. That would be a yes vote, but a no vote would keep the current law, which allows the Arizona legislature to change ballot measures only if it furthers the purpose of the initiative. And they also have to have 3/4 of the vote in both chambers in order to make that change. This is the important part: only if it furthers the purpose of the initiative. That's what it does now. So arguments for Prop 128 is the current Voter Protection Act prevents lawmakers from changing voter approved laws, even when there are unintended consequences or they violate state or US constitutions. Lawmakers cannot repeal unconstitutional laws. Arguments against Prop 128. One single sentence, one word in an initiative might be found to be unconstitutional, and they could repeal the entire initiative if the legislature wanted to do so. What happens now is that the courts, if they find a word or a sentence or a paragraph that is unconstitutional, they nullify that part, and the rest of it is allowed to stand. So if this initiative passes, lawmakers would be able to throw out an entire initiative, even the constitutional parts, and it would shift the power from voters to the legislature. Now, I want to mention to you this booklet that you got from the Secretary of State's office, a little thick little booklet that has all of the groups that are for and against each of these propositions. So refer to that booklet or go onto the Secretary of State's website and you will find all of the groups for and against these propositions. Proposition 129, single subject for initiatives, also put on by the legislature. What it does and what your yes vote would mean that it limits initiatives to a single subject, and it would require each provision in the initiative to be included in the title. A no vote would keep it as it is now. It would allow ballot initiatives to be on more than one subject, and the title would be a general topic. Arguments for Prop 129. Voters would vote on only one subject at a time in a ballot initiative. Now, right now, if you have a ballot initiative with, let's say, 4 different sections and you agree with one part and disagree with another part, how are you going to vote? You're going to vote yes, you're going to vote no. So this way, by separating them all into different initiatives, it would make it so that you can vote yes for the ones you agree on and no for the parts that you disagree on. The title would clearly express the subject of the initiative. And the legislators feel, well, our bills in the legislature can only be on one subject, so initiatives should also. Arguments against Prop 129. This would make it much, much more difficult to get initiatives on the ballot. And the reason for that is that if you had an initiative of 4 different sections, then you'd have to have 4 different initiatives. Now, to get an initiative on the ballot, you've got to have, 240,000 signatures. You'd have to get 240,000 signatures plus twice that to make sure you have enough valid ones for every single initiative for all 4 of those parts. So it would cost more, number one, if you're paying people to get signatures. And number 2, if you have someone who's doing it because they believe in it and they're not getting paid, it's still a lot more work. It's more work for everybody. So let's say there are 4 different initiatives and you have 20 different parts. You might have 20 different clipboards and people have to sign 20 different times. So it's much more of a hassle. It would also be easier to keep the initiatives off the ballot since each would have to be considered separately. And with citizen initiatives, almost always there are court challenges. So what could happen would be that an initiative that has 4 parts, so it's separated into 4 different initiatives, maybe one part, a very important part, is ruled that there are not enough valid signatures for that one. And the other 3 wouldn't even make sense to have on the ballot because the important part wasn't included. So it would be easier to keep initiatives off the ballot. Proposition 130, property tax exemptions. What it does and what a yes vote means is that by law, there are already right now county property tax exemptions for groups such as disabled veterans, widowed people, and some businesses. So what this proposition would do would be allow them to get their property tax cut. The important thing is, regardless of when they became an Arizona resident. Now, right now, the law is, for example, with veterans with disabilities, they would have to be a citizen of the state of Arizona before they went into the service in order to get this. So let's say you have someone from Alabama who goes into the Air Force and is shipped off to Davis Monthan Air Force Base, and then for some reason or another is disabled. That person could not get a property tax cut as the law is now because they were not a citizen of Arizona before they went into the Air Force. So what this does is it allows these people to get a property tax cut regardless of when they became an Arizona resident. It also does not allow a person to be eligible under more than one category. So let's say a disabled veteran is also a widower. He could not get both, like double. They could only get one property tax cut. A no vote means that the legislature cannot make these changes in the law. Okay, arguments for Prop 130. This will allow county assessors to give tax exemptions to disabled veterans, widows, and widowers, no matter when they became an Arizona resident. And it also allows future legislatures and governors to adjust the exemption amount and income qualifications. Now, we know many years we have inflation, and the amount of money it takes to live goes up and up. And so therefore that exemption amount could change, or income qualifications could change according to the economy. And this proposition would allow the legislature or the governor to change those amounts depending on the existing economy. Arguments against Prop 130. These tax cuts will force local governments to either raise taxes or cut spending. It's a tax shift to the citizens who already pay high property taxes. That's you and me and everybody else we know. So you may not know this, but Arizona gives far more in tax cuts and credits than comes into the general fund. So if this proposition passes, the state budget is going to be less will be going into the general fund. And that means that there will be less money available for our roads and public education. Proposition 130, Lieutenant Governor, joint ticket. Now, I've been giving speeches around town, and I ask, now, who is our Lieutenant Governor now? And sometimes people will say, they'll think about it, and they'll think about it. And finally, someone will say, wait a minute, we don't have a Lieutenant Governor now, which is true. We have no Lieutenant Governor now. So what this proposition does is it creates the office of a Lieutenant Governor beginning with the 2026 election, 4 years from now. And I will tell you that most states have a Lieutenant Governor. Sometimes they have to run in a primary. Sometimes they are nominated by the governor candidate. So in this situation, what this proposition would do, it would require any candidates running for governor to name a nominee for lieutenant governor, and they would both be elected on the same political ticket. It replaces the Secretary of State with the lieutenant governor to be the first in line of succession to the governor. Right now, the Secretary of State will take over if something happens to the governor. A no vote would keep it as it is now. There would be no lieutenant governor, and the Secretary of State would be next in line to the governor. Arguments for Prop 131. If the governor departs from office for any reason, this could be from illness, death, going up to the federal government to serve in the federal government, being impeached. We've had a number of these in the state of Arizona happen. If that were to happen, then a person of the same political party, the lieutenant governor, would become governor, and they would be elected on the same ticket as the governor. This would avoid midterm changes in political party and policies. And we have had this happen before in Arizona, that a Democratic governor was replaced by a Republican one, and then vice versa also. Arguments against Prop 131. The initiative has been put on the ballot 2 years before, and the voters voted it down twice. This will be a third time to see what happens. This is an unnecessary spending of taxpayers' money for a new office. This may enable cronyism and corruption, since the lieutenant governor can be appointed by the governor to any position within the governor's authority. For example, to be in charge of a study, or to be on a commission, or to be the head of a commission, or to work with the legislature on legislation, those kinds of things. Next, Proposition 132. Supermajority for ballot propositions that would increase or introduce a tax or fee. Notice that the legislature has put on a number of propositions having to do with initiatives. What it does in a yes vote means it would change the percentage needed to pass a citizen's initiative that increases or introduces a tax or a fee. Right now, it's 50% plus one vote. That percentage would change to 60% of the votes. And I will tell you, almost no initiatives pass with 60% of the vote, almost none. So it would be very, very difficult to have an initiative passed with that amount of required votes. A no vote would keep it so that it's 50% plus one vote for citizens' initiatives. Arguments for Prop 132. It protects taxpayers from runaway spending. And it also requires the same kind of supermajority that the lawmakers have to meet in order to raise or introduce taxes or fees. And that was passed by proposition a number of years ago, by the way. Arguments against Prop 132. It takes power away from the citizens, right, to enact legislation by making it more difficult for initiatives on the ballot to pass. It contradicts the will of the framers of Arizona's Constitution. They said that we would need only a simple majority to pass an initiative. It limits the ability of the people to raise revenues and invest in their future, and it would end simple majority rule. And now I'm going to pass it over to Shirley Muni.
Thank you. Proposition 209 is called the Predatory Debt Collection Protection Act, and this was a citizens' initiative. What it does and what a yes vote means is that it reduces the maximum interest rate on medical debt from 10% to 3% a year. The rate on other debt remains the same. It also increases the amount of certain assets that are exempt from debt collection. For example, of a home that used to be, you could exempt $250,000 of the value from debt collection, now goes to $400,000. And vehicles from $6,000 to $15,000. Household goods from $6,000 to $15,000. And bank accounts from $300 to $5,000, and this would automatically adjust with the inflation rate. It also limits the amount that can be garnished from wages to pay off medical debt. A no vote would keep the interest rate, the amount of exempt assets, and the amount that can be garnished from wages the same. The arguments for this initiative are that it would help people from going into bankruptcy because of medical debt. About 60% of personal bankruptcies are because of medical debt. People shouldn't lose their home or their vehicle because of predatory debt. And you know how much the prices have gone up on cars and houses. The existing amounts of asset exemption and wage garnishment are outdated. So we need to have this updated and be able to adjust with inflation so we don't have to keep going through this every year. Arguments against this is that it would cause creditors to charge more to make up for lost costs. And it wouldn't change how much medical providers charge, and medical providers could provide cash up front. And one criticism that has been made is that it is sponsored by California interests and not from Arizona. We have outsiders trying to influence Arizona's elections. Proposition 211, the Voters' Right to Know Act, or Stop Dark Money. This was another citizens initiative that's been trying to get on the ballot for some time. What it does, and a yes vote, would require that political groups and people who are spending more than $50,000 on a statewide campaign or $25,000 on other campaigns to influence the outcome of an election. That means specifically on media, for example, TV ads and billboards and so on. They would have to disclose the donor of any individual contributions over $5,000. And this includes PACs that may have been formed specifically for this proposition or this candidate or an individual. It requires real-time reporting of significant campaign media spending. It allows the Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission to enforce these positions. They would administer this with civil penalties for violations. This does not apply to federal campaigns, only state and local campaigns. Obviously, a no vote means that the donors will not be disclosed and you don't know exactly who is sponsoring an ad that you would see on television or a billboard or a newspaper ad. Arguments for is that so-called dark money has corrupted our democracy. People are buying elections, in other words. Arizona voters deserve to know who is funding political campaigns and campaign ads. It doesn't limit spending. It just identifies the big spenders with real names, not made up names of political committees. And it would also stop regulated utility companies from secretly funding the campaigns of their own regulators. The perfect example of this was in the previous campaign for Corporation Commission, the Arizona Public Service Corporation. This is the major utility in the Phoenix area, sponsored candidates. They contributed vast amounts of money, millions of dollars, to candidates for the Corporation Commission. The Corporation Commission is the agency that regulates the rates that utility corporations can charge. And this would stop that. It doesn't stop their contributions. It identifies who is sponsoring a candidate or an issue. Arguments against this is that by letting the public know who the political donors are, the donors could be threatened or harassed. And also that this limits free speech as defined by the United States Supreme Court in the Citizens United case, which ruled that campaign contributions are a form of free speech. Proposition 308 would offer in-state tuition rates for non-citizen residents. These are the dreamers who are still going to school, but are not legally citizens at this point. This was referred to the ballot by the legislature. It is not a constitutional amendment. It would be a law. A yes vote means that it would repeal Proposition 300 that was passed in 2006. That does not allow in-state tuition for college for non-citizen residents. The DACA Act that allowed deferred action for non-citizens, for children who were brought here, immigrants who were brought here as children, wasn't passed until 2012. So the proposition that was passed in 2006 wouldn't have applied to them. It allows non-citizen residents to get scholarships and other financial aid to attend universities and colleges, as well as in-state tuition rates, which are about a third that out-of-state students would have to pay. And it requires students to have been enrolled for 2 years in and to have graduated from an Arizona high school. They have to have gone to school in Arizona, graduated from an Arizona high school before they apply. A no vote means that students without legal immigration status would continue to pay out-of-state tuition and not be eligible for financial aid. Arguments for this is that it would help Arizona universities and colleges increase their enrollment, and undocumented students and the dreamers are a vital part of Arizona's economy. We're short of workers in our workforce, and this will help keep them in Arizona and allow an educated workforce, which is what businesses are looking for when they're seeking to locate in Arizona. And it benefits Arizona with no new taxes being involved. It would not require any taxes to do this. This passed the legislature on a bipartisan vote, I might add. Arguments against: many immigrants came here illegally and should not be treated the same as citizens. And it disrespects the immigration process. It's not fair to people who immigrated to America the legal way. And it would be a magnet for illegal immigration. These students should apply for grants. As you know, grants are limited, but they're saying these students should apply for grants. Proposition 309, here's another one that affects how you vote. This would require voter ID for mail-in ballots and in-person voting. This was referred to the ballot by the legislature. A yes vote means that it would require people who use mail-in ballots to write their birth date, as well as their driver's license, state ID number, or the last 4 digits of their social security number on a privacy flap on the envelope or on an inner envelope to conceal the information. Right now, as you know, if you vote by mail, as almost 90% of the voters in Arizona do these days, all you have to do is sign it and date it, and your signature will be checked by the recorder's office. It also requires people who vote in person early or on election day to produce a photo ID only. Right now, you can either have a photo ID or you can show 2 other forms of identification that show your current address with your name. This would eliminate that, and you must have a photo ID, like a driver's license. A no vote means that voters can sign and date their mail-in ballot, and non-photo IDs are still allowed on election day. Arguments for is that some people have lost faith in the integrity of our elections, and this will restore their confidence in our elections because only legal votes will be accepted and counted. Some people believe absentee ballots, which would mail-in ballots, remain the largest source of potential voter fraud. This would make it harder to cheat. Mail-in votes should have the same security as in-person votes. And they would waive the fee to get a photo ID for qualified voters if they apply for it. Arguments against is that this is voter suppression by making it harder to vote. There would be more opportunities to throw out mail ballots because of smudges, misread information, bad handwriting on IDs. There's also no opportunity to cure the ballot as you can do now. If something is wrong with your ballot, you could be contacted and you would have 3 days to correct any misconception about your ballot. And providing private information like your social security number, for example, would invade the voter's privacy. This could link people's identity and how they voted and increase the opportunity for identity theft. People will be turned away at the polls on election day, including seniors with expired licenses, for example, and younger people without a driver's license or a non-operating license. It certainly results in higher costs for county election departments with more staff and time required to go over these additional ID requirements. And finally, we have Proposition 310, funding rural fire districts, which was also referred to the ballot by the legislature. A yes vote means that it increases the sales tax throughout Arizona by 1/10 of a cent to fund rural fire districts, or it would amount to about 10 cents more if you purchase something for $100. By the way, a rural district is something that is not in an incorporated area, like the people who live in the city of Tucson pay for their own city fire department. But anything outside the city, such as the foothills, would be a rural area, and they are protected by rural districts, not necessarily out in the country. So it could be suburban areas. And these rural fire districts have their own tax collection. This will raise about $150 million a year, and no district would get more than 3% of the total that is raised every year. And this will pay for additional trucks, fire personnel, and medical service personnel. A no vote means it does not increase the state sales tax. Arguments for is that rural fire districts serve 1.5 million Arizonans. They fight fires, including wildfires, I might add, and provide needed emergency medical services. These rural fire districts are strapped for manpower, for their equipment and resources. Old trucks and medical equipment cost more to maintain. 911 calls often take at least 30 minutes for a response, and the call volume has increased dramatically while funds have remained the same since 2011. And by the way, I added, some areas are serving many more people now. The suburban areas are growing. We're getting new developments popping up, but their tax rates, their fire district tax rates have not gone up. Emergency services are needed along Arizona's highways, and lives will be saved. And as you know, the highways in Arizona go through a lot of really remote areas, and it can take a long time for help to reach you. Arguments against: all the residents of the state shouldn't subsidize rural fire departments. Local personal property taxes should do this. Local fire district taxes have already gone up more than property taxes have. And there is waste, inefficiency, and abuse of taxpayers' money by having fire personnel in each rural district. Counties should provide these services and perhaps combine districts. One opposing person said that, for example, in the Verde Valley, there are at least 5 different fire districts, and they could be combined and combine their equipment and their resources. Also, people in cities will be paying for their own fire services as well as fire services in rural counties. This is redistributive and unfair. City people also don't vote for rural fire districts, so this is taxation without representation. Also, this is a terrible precedent. Sales taxes are regressive and they hurt low-income people more. They could have spent some part of the Arizona budget surplus on this instead of raising taxes. I want to remind you that we've already received, you should have already received your mail-in ballot if you're voting by mail, and in-person or early voting has already started at the vote centers throughout Pima County. It's too late to register to vote, but you can request a ballot by mail until the last workday of this month, October 28th, Friday. And the last day to request a replacement ballot, if your ballot has been destroyed, is November 1st. And we do recommend that if you're mailing your ballot, be sure it's in the mail by November 1st so that it's received in the elections department by election day. Of course, there's always emergency voting, and if you're suddenly become ill or something like that, or you're called out of town, you can vote Saturday, November 5th and Monday, November 7th. And don't forget, Election Day is November 8th. The vote centers are open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Thank you so much, ladies, for that excellent information. It is now time for questions. I'll read aloud the questions that have been submitted and the panel will respond. Just as a reminder, if you have a question you want to add, those of you participating by Zoom can write your questions into the Q&A section located at the bottom of your screen. If your question is intended for a specific proposition or panelist, please do indicate that for us. For those watching on Facebook, again, unfortunately, Facebook doesn't provide an interactive option to ask questions, but from previous experiences, we've learned it's likely someone else will ask what you would have.
I would like to mention to our audience that beginning in the primary this year, we have something called vote centers. It used to be that you had to go to the polling place in your precinct. But as of the primary, and of course now in the general election, we have something called vote centers, which means that you can go to any of the vote centers in Pima County to vote. They have, each poll worker has a tablet. You would show them your ID or IDs, and they would print out a ballot just for you, a specific ballot just for you, for your precinct and your legislative district, your congressional districts, and the people you have to vote for. So let's say you work downtown, but you live in the foothills. That means you can go to a vote center near downtown or in downtown, and you don't have to rush home really fast to try and get to your polling place before it closes at 7. So it makes it much easier for voters to vote. So keep that in mind if you vote on Election Day.
Thank you. I have an additional question. How are mail-in ballots signatures verified? And I believe this question was directed to Shirley, but I think any of our panelists could answer that.
All the mail-in ballots go to the recorder's office, and they have people specially trained to examine the signatures that you used when you registered to vote. And the ballots are removed from the envelope that you signed. So after your signature has been checked, the ballot itself, which does not have your name on it, then goes to the elections department to be counted. But your signature and your eligibility to vote go to the recorder's office first, where it's checked, and then the ballot only goes to the elections department to be counted.
I would like to add, what happens is they will have people look at the signature and check it against your other signature. And then if they see that there's a difference, like for example, if a person has a stroke, their signature might be different, or even as we age, our signatures can be different. If it looks like it's not matching, then they will get co-workers in to look at it. And if they all decide, okay, that is close enough, then they'll let it through. If they decide, no, it's still a problem, they will contact you. The recorder's office will contact you by calling you on the phone, texting you, trying to get a hold of you so that you can come in or over the phone and tell them that, yes, that is your signature.
And I might add that all this checking is done not by one person, but by teams that are from both parties. So nothing is done with your ballot or your signature or your outer envelope, your inner envelope where your signature is, or your ballot without being checked by people from both parties. If one person has to leave for some reason, nothing can be done with that until there are two people of both parties available to do the checking.
Excellent. Thank you so much. A question for Cindy. Has this new requirement about not letting G's and Y's loop outside the signature box played a role in any petitions being rejected?
I have no actual experience with that, but I am sure that that has happened. The league, when we do petitions, there are slots cut in pieces of plastic or cardboard to make sure that the person's signature doesn't go below the line. But what other organizations do, I couldn't say. And if you're, my Y in my legal name, I am very conscious of keeping it within the lines, but if you're not tuned into that, it might go below the line.
I've even seen some organizations that use a Post-it note at the line so that your signature can't go below the line. If you have a Y or a G in your name, it'll go onto the Post-it note and not below the line.
Right.
Excellent. A question for Shirley regarding Prop 309. Has there been any attempt to estimate the number of fraudulent votes that would in fact be presented by these voter ID requirements and compare it to the number of eligible voters who will have a significant hurdle in voting and possibly not be able to vote?
I don't know about attempts. As you know, we had the so-called audit that was hired by a private company, was hired by the state Senate to examine the mail-in ballots from Maricopa County. They suspected a lot of fraudulent voting in Maricopa County, and they found no fraud. They found the ballot count was not only accurate, but it turned out, for example, the vote for president got slightly more than the original vote. They did not throw out, it was just, they could not find any fraud in the ballot count there. There hasn't been any attempt that I know of to do this statewide. This was just for the Maricopa County ballot. Vivian, do you have anything to add for that?
I do want to mention that in Pima County here, and I believe around the state, that we do a hand audit after every election on the Saturday after the election. And what happens is the heads of the political parties get together, they pick out of a hat the types of elections, the candidate elections or the ballot elections, and it's, which ones are going to be counted. And what that audit does is it looks at the ballots and whether or not it agrees with the machine, to make sure it agrees with the machine. If a machine is way off, then there's a problem. But if the hand audit shows it's exactly the same number, then we know that that machine is accurate. So I do want to mention that. Just to let you know, they bring to the table a big box. You might have 250 ballots, and we have maybe 4 or 5 races that we have to count for. And we count everybody who's in that race. If it's a primary, all the people running in that primary. If it's a general election, of course, it's only 2 people. And then we count it, and then we tell the person from the elections department what that number is that we came up with. And the elections department person will say, oh yeah, that's correct. And then we go on to the next race. Or no, that's not correct. And we have to keep counting, and we don't know what the correct number is. We have to keep counting over and over again until we get the number that the elections department says. Once in a great while, there might be one ballot off, but almost never. It's almost always the same as the machine. So it's a way that we can audit the machines to make sure they are accurate.
It is random. I've participated in that before too. It is random. For example, they might say out of the hat, they would pull precinct 120, the vote for state Senate, for example. And there, of course, you're voting for many different offices. And it takes a long time, by the way, to count these individual ballots. And each count is done at tables with more than one party. You can have Republicans, Democrats, or Libertarians at the same party, at the same table with you. There's no tables or no counting done by just one party. I might add that in the past few days, there was a state court ruling, Cochise County. Some people in Cochise County wanted them to do a complete hand count of the ballots for this election. And that would have taken many, many days to do that just for Cochise County, and the state Supreme Court ruled that this was unconstitutional.
Thank you.
Shirley, I've seen you there. We've seen each other in the auditing room.
We have a couple of additional questions regarding ballots directed toward Shirley, but I think anybody can answer some of these. How are mail-in ballot signatures verified? And can you again, what ID is now required to vote in person?
Okay, we did talk about this. The signatures are verified by workers of both parties in the recorder's office. And they remove the ballot from the envelope that you mailed. And as you know, if you voted by mail, there's an inner ballot, an inner envelope that you have signed and dated. And they take that signature that you have done. Trained people examine the signature to make sure it's similar. And as Vivian pointed out, if it has changed slightly, either because of age or medical condition or some other reason, if the signature looks suspicious and it's agreed upon by both parties sitting at the table, they will try to contact the voter to verify that this is indeed their signature. And if the signature passes the identification, it goes to the ballot is removed. The ballot itself is removed from this inner envelope, and the ballot itself only goes to the election department. So there is no way to identify the ballot with a person because your name is not on the ballot itself. ID at the polls required right now is required either a photo ID, such as a driver's license, or 2 pieces of current identification, such as a bill, a utility bill, or something like that, that has your name and your current address on it. It helps if you have, for example, an outdated ID, if you've moved to assisted living, for example, and you no longer drive, but you still have your old ID, but you do have some bills that have come to you to that location. You can use those 2 pieces of identification at the polls. The proposition would remove that and require you to have a current ID with your current address on it.
Thank you. What if I will be out of town when ballots are mailed? A, can you call the recorder's office and request a ballot be mailed anywhere in the country, wherever you may be, without changing your address on file for future ballots?
No, and not only that, but mail ballots are not allowed to be forwarded. So if you don't pick it up, or you have moved and someone else is living in that address, they will not forward the mail ballots. But you can request, as I mentioned before, you can request a special mail ballot for this election if you contact the recorder's office.
Thank you. A question for Cindy. Who is on the Legislative Council who reviews the texts of positions? Is there a political element to this job?
Well, I actually don't know the answer to that question, but the Legislative Council is relatively independent, and it is not even part of the Secretary of State office. So my feeling is that they would be able to look at the language and correct it, even if they didn't agree with it or if it wasn't in their party. But I could find that out, and I would let anybody know who wanted to find out. They could just contact the league office and they will have the answer.
I suspect, I'm pretty sure it's quite nonpartisan and a bunch of lawyers. And I think they also check to see what the financial implications of each proposition would be.
Well, I think that's later on. The Legislative Budget Committee does that.
Okay.
And that That is.
And that's also nonpartisan or bipartisan.
Right, right.
And Cindy, another question on petitions. Why do the petitions for referendums only have to be submitted 90 days before the general election, but the lead time for initiatives is 4 months?
Well, the new initiative needs more time to be reviewed, whereas a referendum is actually changing something that has already been adjudicated earlier in the history of Arizona. There are some that are changing Proposition 300 from year 2012 or something like that. So it takes more time to review a legislative initiative that's proposing something new as opposed to something that is changing or trying to amend something that has already been passed.
Shirley, a question on Prop 211. Don't individuals already have to meet disclosure requirements when they contribute directly to a candidate?
There are organizations that are supposed to be nonpartisan election organizations. And to get a little technical, they are the section of the code. Help me out here, Vivian. Is it? I'm just my mind is going blank a bit. It's 501. Oh, I got it. 501c3 is for nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations. 501c4 is for nonpartisan organizations, supposedly, that are educational. But 501c3 organizations cannot take positions on candidates or issues, and 501c4 can, even if they're nonprofit. However, the 501c4 organizations do not have to have their members identified. So they're the members of those organizations, and they can be formed. These are the PACs, the political action committees, that are very often formed just for the purpose of one election or one candidate or one issue. And they'll have special, and they'll make up a name like Citizens for Good Government. And you don't know who's running it. You don't know who's collecting money or how much they're giving. And this proposition would identify any individual or any organization that gives more than $5,000. It doesn't change the amount that they give. It just identifies them.
Thank you. We have a general question for any and all of you. Where can one find out more about these ballot propositions?
There's a lot of information in this big fat booklet that you all got from the Secretary of State's office or the Secretary of State's website, which is sosaz.gov. And you can go to that website and find more information. There are several organizations that have their own opinions about the ballots. But this booklet that you got not only gives the full text of the proposition and the arguments for and against, but it gives people, organizations, and individuals who have made statements for and against each proposition. These are paid statements. So some of them go on for a couple of paragraphs, perhaps, about why they support or oppose any individual proposition. But you should realize that these are opinions. They are not official explanations.
Correct.
Excellent. I do not see any other questions. So I would like to thank our panelists, Cindy Sofrin, Vivian Hart, and Shirley Muni, and to you, our audience, for attending this morning. Just to let you know, a recording of today's panel discussion will be available on the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson's YouTube channel. Mark your calendars for the reproductive rights panel discussion on Wednesday, October 26th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the YWCA. You can always visit our website, lwvtucson.org, for more information on all of these panels, recordings, and everything pertaining to voting. And finally, vote. Remind your family, your friends, your neighbors, people on the street, everywhere you go, remind people to vote. Thank you so much again for attending today.